Today we are going to take rosemary cuttings.
Rosemary cuttings.
And the ideal time to take rosemary cuttings is after they've done blooming, but my rosemary is blooming now. We're in February. Now this one here is just starting to form buds.
Right.
Okay. The key with the cuttings is you have to use last year's growth. A rosemary plant will not bloom until it's 5 years old. A rosemary plant always blooms midwinter. It's a semi-tropical plant. And the rosemary is great here because it's food for the bees. So like when the weather is above 10, I open the doors and then the bees will actually come and feed.
That's a young plant?
That's a young plant, and you can tell the difference in the shade of the wood. See how it's darker? Okay, that's the year before, and that's last year's growth. I am going to take some of these.
Where do you cut? Do you have
I usually cut above a node.
Above a node, and then...
Okay, a node is where the branches come out, right? So this is a node. So I always cut above the node.
And then that's last year's growth?
Last year's growth and the year before's growth.
And the year before, okay.
Okay. So I can do the same.
Okay.
Even if there's a little bit older. What I try to do is, this is kind of the shaping. And then once this rosemary is done blooming, it'll flush another, some more growth. Now this one here is in bud, so I'm just going to trim it a little bit. And some varieties, I don't know if you notice, like this variety is a lot woodier than this one.
Oh, so this one is woodier one. Yeah, it's thicker.
It's a thicker variety.
Right, and this is not so woody.
And this one here is what they call the barbecue variety.
Okay.
Which it grows nice tall things, and then you use them to make shish kebabs, and then you have your herbs right on it.
With the branches?
With the branches. And that's the old traditional rosemary.
Okay, so
this is the old traditional. The old traditional rosemary doesn't bloom as early.
Okay.
So we got enough to do a couple of flats.
Okay.
For cuttings, this is about the level I add for seeding onions.
So this is about 2 inches deep?
Yeah, and I use...
Just a tray, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't pack it very tightly because I tend to water it in. Something to remember when you're using Pro-Mix, and you kind of want to go a little faster, if you use warm water, the warm water will absorb faster in your Pro-Mix. So yesterday, when I came here, I used warm water, and now it's nice, and you moisten it, so when you squeeze it, it makes a ball that gently breaks apart. So, see, because I cut it over the node when I took it off the branch, there's a little bit left. So I have to cut below the node, and then I take the bottom leaves off. And I go 1, 2, 3, 4 over the node.
Okay. And that's the old...
That's last year's wood.
Right? Yeah.
And then I just stick.
Did you cut the top off?
I cut the top off because I'm making a second one with this one.
Oh. And that's still the last year's... What?
That's last year's growth.
Oh, right.
I usually take about 4 and 5 nodes.
Okay.
And your average cutting is 4 nodes.
And you take how many bottom leaves? Just 2?
I usually take 1 or 2 off.
1 or 2 off.
Now what's going to happen with this one, because there's buds, the flowers may abort.
Right.
If they do flower, you pick the blooms off because you want your plants to focus on rooting.
That's right.
Not flowering. The key is we want the plants to establish a good root system. So the same with, and that's a mistake everybody does when they plant strawberries.
Oh.
When you're planting strawberries, the first year you put the transplants in, you're supposed to pick the blooms off. You want to encourage root growth. And I usually put them about an inch apart. Now, not all cuttings will take.
Okay.
For example, this one here, okay, see the node is there. That very bottom will not form roots. You're more likely to have roots where the nodes start, where the nodes are. So, and when you cut your branch from the rosemary, it's best to cut above the node because then you don't have dead wood that comes.
Well, I used to do lots of pruning in Calgary.
That's right. Whenever you prune, you should always cut above the node.
Thank you, yes.
So we are pruning and basically using what's left over from the pruning to take cuttings.
Yeah.
And I have done this with fig trees.
Oh, yeah. Fig does very well.
Actually, we will go out and somebody wanted some sage plants.
Yeah.
So I will be doing actually sage this year. See what you're standing on there? Those are heat mats. And they're there, and it's a little extra heat to germinate seeds. And I will probably be plugging it in and putting the rosemary on it just to give it some extra root stimulation.
Okay.
It's not a really good place for you to dig, dog.
I have to videotape her.
Ollie, what are you doing? You're not supposed to be tearing stuff apart. And see this one?
Yeah.
See how it has side branches?
Right.
You can just rip them off.
Okay.
And see it leaves like a little foot. And then just take the bottom leaves off and
that's just it.
Yeah. Because that little foot will actually make roots.
Oh, it helps?
And that's another way of doing it.
Oh, I thought clear cut helps better, but
Not necessarily.
interesting.
Okay, that's 3-year-old rosemary, okay?
Still, does it root or it?
I usually don't use it. It's a lot harder to root.
That's what I thought. Yeah, younger is better, right?
Yeah,
More
younger is better.
growth
Well,
going.
no more than 2 years old. Some people will actually take rosemary cuttings in the fall.
Okay.
But for example, what are you guys doing? It's relaxing time. You guys went for your walk already, so you should be relaxing. Rosemary, you can also do like what they call air layering. Just, put a branch near the ground,
Right.
and then it will create another little plant, right?
Right.
Your modern rosemary is grown actually in India. And what they do is they grow lots of rosemary in India,
Yeah.
and then they take the cuttings and ship them via air they mail them.
Oh.
Take the cuttings and mail them to the greenhouses.
Okay.
And they all come in bare root. And that's how some of the greenhouse growers start their plants, by cuttings, not necessarily seeds.
Well, that brought me another question. If rosemary is easier to grow from the cutting rather than seeds.
Yes,
That's what I
why
thought.
I do cuttings and not seed, because the seed is extremely hard to germinate. It actually needs a cold snap. A cold snap is, they need what what the commercial growers call stratification.
Okay.
They need minimum of 14 days in sub-zero temperature.
So it's
or
like
cool temperature.
artificial winter.
An artificial winter to stimulate. The seed will not
Activate. Yeah.
unless it has had the cold snap.
That's
so
right.
most tree seeds need to be stratified before they will germinate.
Right.
For example, if you harvest pine cones and you don't stratify them, the seeds a lot of them will not germinate. And the best way to do it is pop them in your freezer for 14 days.
Yeah.
Lavenders are the biggest, hardest ones to germinate.
Okay. Yeah, I failed.
They,
from the seeds.
They're buggers.
Yeah,
There's
I
no
did the what did you say?
stratification.
Stratification, and then still couldn't do any germination.
I would recommend bottom heat with
Okay.
a heat mat.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
And if you don't have a heat mat, where's the best spot to germinate your seeds?
The top of the fridge.
On the top of the fridge. Yes. Once the seeds have break into dormancy and are actively germinating, you can take them from the top of the fridge and then move them somewhere else. But
Right.
the harder seeds to germinate, it's best to germinate them on top of the fridge.
Right.
So if you take cuttings of, for example, sweet potatoes
Ooh.
and geraniums and stuff like that,
Yeah.
that are tropical plants, here is semi-tropical. It still hovers around 0. So rosemary can handle sub-zero temperatures.
Right. So
but-
well-insulated greenhouse works for rosemary. Basically.
That's correct.
Yeah. But not sweet potatoes.
Not sweet potatoes. So
That's
and
lavender.
the best way to do lavender is trim it.
All right.
And the more you trim lavender, the bushier it will be.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then this is sage.
Yeah. Blue sage.
And you see how sage tends to die back quite a bit,
Yes.
right? And see this one, the leaves are pretty well died back. So where you want to take your cuttings is where there's still kind of a greenish leaves, okay? So you do the same thing, 4 nodes, take the bottom leaves off.
Right.
And the key with the sage, because it's, I don't know if it's the wrong time of year or not. Sage, sometimes I'll do cuttings later on in the season.
Yeah.
And see how it's green? Okay?
That's
Sage, because it dies back, you have that nice green where it's supposed to be. See how it's green? See
Yeah.
how it's green?
Yeah.
Rosemary and lavender are the 2 hardest herbs to grow. Just like that.
Right.
The deeper the better.
The deeper is
And
better.
even if you touch the bottom, some people will actually pop them in diagonally.
All right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. See, this one is dead.
Okay.
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 So I'm not gonna bother with
Right.
that one. Always check for the green part. So you kind of can't do it haphazardly. You still have to have your brain working.
Right.
So this is lavender.
All
You do
right.
it about the same way.
Yeah.
So just I took all my cuttings, got them all ready. Now just popping them in the ground. And lavender and rosemary don't grow very fast, so
Okay.
these will be tiny, tiny little plants for this year. Found a piece of rosemary
Okay.
and is chewing it.
Oh,
So
aromatic.
she's cleaning her teeth. If you try to take bigger cuttings like this, they sometimes will not take. The smaller cuttings seem to take easier than the bigger cuttings. Lavender and sage are actually evergreen. They actually keep their leaves.
Yes. Well,
And-
rosemary too, right? If they survive.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
If they survive. And see here, there's the dead leaves, but there's the little living leaves inside. So I'm going to plant that one anyway.
So just water very well.
And I like to soak the soil really, really well. So I go over it about 4 times. So that's 2. And that will actually pack the soil, right?
Right.
Around the roots.
Yep.
There.
Here you go.
I'll water about every 2 weeks this
Every 2
time of
weeks,
year.
okay.
I will be plugging in my heating cables today.
Yeah.
So then the warmth will make it that I need to water a little bit more often.
So this is the same. You should be careful not to overwater.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay.